heard the airstrike because it's an airstrike and it's right by the building. But Gabar says that when he was on Nobit and talking to the Arab guys, they heard civilian voices walking toward the Nokta from the enemy direction. And he says they saw a group of women all spaced out across the field, and then behind them, what they reckon were men dressed as women. And there was a big discussion. The commander there was saying, okay, let's just bomb them, let's just call it an airstrike. And a bunch of the other guys were saying, no, no. And they used the Arab expression. It means, no, this is against God, i.e. that that's an immoral thing. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And there was this big debate going on. I mean, it was really sounded like it was a contrast between these guys wanting to do the right thing, but equally knowing that, okay, if there are Daesh guys just pushing these women forward and they're behind, and they want to get close enough to set off bombs or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden an airstrike hits that field, and then all the voices stop. So it's sort of that ended it. And like I said, I must have heard the airstrike but didn't know anything about the incident. And with so much going on, I don't think Gabar even spoke about it the next day. Not like he was trying to cover it up or anything.
He asked about it, like, he was like, did you hear anything last night? And I was like, yeah, I heard a lot of commotion, and I heard screaming, and then I heard people arguing about it. And I thought, like, well, should I get up? Because I'm like, I have a chance to rest, and nobody's coming to get me to say, like, hey, there's a situation and we need you to fight or anything. And I was thinking, like, well, if I do need to shoot, it's dark and I don't have night vision stuff, and like I can't see anyway, but maybe I can see with the moon. And at one point I did get up, but I didn't see anything. And I went back to lay down, and I heard, all the yelling and the screaming and then the airstrike, and it was quiet again. And that was all that I knew about it. And then what Gabar had said the next day was what you just said, that they had seen, women, and they could hear them screaming, and then there was an airstrike and it was quiet. And that was, all that I really knew about it. So yeah, that was like a bad situation, and I was so exhausted at that point that I was like, man, I should rest while I can rest, and if they don't need me to be a part of whatever's going on, then I'll just stay and rest. But yeah, I mean, what can you do? It's bad of the enemy to do that, and it's bad of coalition to drop an airstrike on that. And sometimes I feel like the only thing that you can do is like take punishment. Like you can just let them get close and hurt you and do your best to fight, or you can like, make an amoral decision, and I'm just glad I wasn't a part of that decision-making process. I wouldn't have wanted to airstrike them, but, I wouldn't have said go ahead and airstrike them, but I also wasn't in the position to make that decision either.
So your feeling would have been you'd have preferred that they'd have actually gotten close enough so as you could have confirmed that it was a disguised attack, and then we could just engage the enemy, and you would know, you would have certainty.
Yeah, I would, like, ideally, in retrospect, I think that the best thing to do would be, like, don't call in an airstrike, but call the Spectre gunship and have the C-130 Spectre gunship flying around us in a circle, targeting them, but not shooting. And then we communicate with them through the translator, or they, Cassidy communicates with them and tell them, hey, get down, everybody get down, take off your fucking hijab, I don't care. I want to see everybody's face. Take off your shirt, I don't care if you're a woman, this sucks for me too. And then, go about taking prisoners, or, identifying, like, if there are men dressed as women, if there's weapons, shoot them, and then if they want to surrender, yeah, great. But, yeah, I mean, that is one of those really bad situations that, like, nobody wants to be in. And, I think that in, like, one aspect, we're really fortunate that we didn't have to be part of that decision-making process, and that we didn't get hurt by a really sneaky dirty trick that the enemy was trying to pull, hiding behind women as human shields.
Yeah.
You know, like, because you got to keep the moral high ground. But are you keeping the moral high ground if you drop a bomb on the human shields? Like, I'd rather not. But yeah. So, yeah, anything else about that?
No, I mean, that's it, really. I mean, I think you pretty much summarised it well. It's just a horrible situation, and thankfully it was out of our hands. I mean, we were there as combatants, so in some way, you know, you bear a responsibility for it. But yeah, I mean, these things happen when you're up against this kind of enemy.
Yeah.
So that night, you know, I remember getting, not long into sleep, they woke us up and said, we're moving out again. I remember that.
Yeah, so we moved out. We went like across the street, maybe to the mosque building, and we went on the roof. And I remember thinking it was really clean. And I collected a blanket there because it was cold. And we only stood there for like a little while.
Okay.
And then we moved forward behind the bulldozer and Humvee again. And we moved forward, turned a little bit to the right, went closer to the enemy, and then we were pretty much at our new Nocta where like all the crazy stuff went down. And that night, when we got there, we went up to the third floor. Carker said he saw something. He saw a person behind this building. And I didn't see them, but I was watching in that direction, and then I noticed a fire further in that direction. And everybody was like, oh, yeah, Desh is there, the enemy's there, Chet is there, they're burning their stuff, so we can't take it. So that's what they would do, is they would burn their equipment and their, you know, maybe their ideology and their weapons that they couldn't carry, and then they would run. And then shortly after, an airstrike hit right there, and that was like, it seemed really big and really close. And I think a few times the enemy tried to push back forward towards us that night, and an airstrike would hit like right outside the building, and it would like, you know, shake you to the core. Like, was this one song, Going the Distance? And he's like, bow shaking earthquakes of doubt and remorse. Like, and like when the airstrike hits next to you, you're just like, oh, you know, it's really invigorating. It shakes you to the bones, to the marrow. And then the C-130 was hitting the enemy too. I was the night I took videos of like, I held the phone up above the wall and like took videos of the airstrike and the C-130 gunship hitting the enemy just like constantly for like, you know, like the airstrike happens in an instant, but when the gunship hits, it's constant for like 5 minutes of just steady explosions and gunfire from an aircraft into a football field sized area, putting a bullet into every square inch. And so, you know, that was like, it's inspiring when it's on your team hitting the enemy, you know, it's like, yeah. And I was cheering. And then that night, when we got into the building, the killdozer went ahead of us, and he turned to the left, and then he turned again, left again, so he like made a U and went back behind us, but now on our left side, and he was behind the base building next to us when he hit the mine that was as big as an airstrike, but there had been no jet, and the killdozer was right there, and then there was a gigantic explosion, and the killdozer was dead, and the driver was dead.
I mean, we thought it was an airstrike.
Yeah.
Because I remember saying, why is there an airstrike behind us? Are the enemy behind us?
Yeah.
And that really puts you on edge because you're thinking, okay, we know the enemy's in front of us. Has someone alerted them, the aircraft, that there's a group of enemies behind us? And then it took a while for that dust to clear. It took a long while. And then we realised, oh, it's the killdozer.
Yeah.
And at that time, we didn't know that the driver had been killed. But
we
it
asked,
was massive.
like,
It was massive.
Yeah. We had asked, like, oh, do they need help? Like, we can do medic stuff. And they were like, no.
Because really, at that point, we were told that we would be at the furthest Nocta forward on the front line, and that's where we were. So they didn't want anyone to leave that Nocta.
Yeah.
Because there'd be no one. There'd be a hole in the line then. So it made sense for us to stay there.
Well, and I think, you know, he probably died instantly. Like, even if he wasn't like torn apart, just the concussion of that size of an explosion, like liquefy your brain. Like I've heard of that where like there'd be an IED and the soldiers would run up to their friends and the guy had no shrapnel wounds, but he was just dead. You know, he was just like completely dead and still and limp, but there was no tears in the skin, no holes in the body. He had just been shaken to death.
Yeah.
you know, just by the concussion. Or like stop your heart, you know. But yeah, so there was nothing really that happened as far as us fighting that night.
How did you feel about the? I mean, you described the C-130 flying around, and the way it would just sort of fly. To me, it seemed almost mesmerizingly slow. The way it would just circle around in what seemed to be a relatively small area and pop out those grenades. And that, like you said, it contrasted with the airstrike, is in the sense that you'd hear the aircraft, the jet screaming in, and then the airstrike would hit, and then it's over. And it's so close that it really seemed, there's something surreal about it, and there's something I found. On the one hand, what you described as that shock of it, of being shaken to your core, but on the other hand, there's a sort of, I found a kind of acceptance to it of, okay, this is it. We're on the front line. This is where we asked to be, and to me, that sort of also gave me a sense of contentment's probably the wrong word, but it was a sense of, okay, I don't need
like
to go
fulfillment.
Yeah, I guess so. Like
Like,
we
I
don't need
wanted
to
to
go
fight.
anywhere else. We don't
Yeah.
need to march any further. If we march any further forward, we're going to be in enemy territory. So
Yeah.
this is it, And it was, to me, it was, if that night when we arrived there really felt like the culmination of all the effort I'd put in to get to Rojava and be involved in the combat, and
Yeah.
the way we'd had to fight just to get into the combat zone, and then had to fight to get onto the front line. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if that occurred to you when you were there, or
Yeah. Like when I was a kid, there was like this really popular book in like the Christian community that I was a part of with like my dad's family, and it's called The Purpose Driven Life. And for me, like ever since I was a kid, my purpose was to be a sniper, and then like I get to the army and they're like, oh, there's no positions for you in sniper right now, and all of these things came up and I couldn't do it. And I was fit to do it. I went to the selection course and I had made it, and they were like, oh, but we got all these officers that are going ahead of you and all of these sergeants, and so they're going ahead of you, you got bumped off the list. And I was like, oh man, then I was out of the army and I felt like I had no purpose and like no place in the world for years, for like 10 years after the army. And then going through all the trouble to get here and doing all the training and all the waiting and getting sick and getting better again, and all of that, and then getting to the front, and finally being at the front of the front, because the first few nights it was the back of the front. And it felt like we were being like protected and coddled, and like like, oh, you're our honored guest, welcome to the front, don't get in trouble. Like no, I came here to get in trouble. I want to get in as much trouble as I can and see if I survive. I want to like go into the darkest place that exists and then fight my way out of it. And so it felt like the culmination of my purpose, like the culmination of a lifetime of training, of like 30 years of like training in a military family, and then in the military, and then out of the military continuing to train myself, and then finding a way back to this place like that I had never made it to. And it felt like it felt good. It was selfish feeling, but like at the same time it's like in order to be a fulfilled person doing what you want to do, what you believe is right, you have to be a little bit selfish to accomplish your goals.
And there you were.
Yeah.
Right on the front line.
And so then the next morning, I think the first thing that happened, like we started to get up and like we started to look around, and you and me were up, early and watching. Probably like one of us was on no bet at sunrise or something. I was on no bet at sunrise because I made a video with my phone, and then right after sunrise we saw the motorcycles. And I was frustrated with that situation because we saw the motorcycles, and before that I think friends had been walking around in front of the building, walking towards like enemy stuff, like looting the truck. And we were like, who the fuck is that? Like, I will shoot you. And they were like, whoa, we're friends. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you are. Don't fucking move. And we're calling on the radio, and they don't understand us and we don't understand them. And then the radio says those are friends. So we're like, okay. And then right after that we see the motorcycles coming up. So I'm like, oh, all right, cool, I'm gonna shoot these guys. And they're like, wait, we heard on the radio there might be civilians. So now I'm like, oh man, you know, like, what the fuck? What kind of call is that? Like, they're coming towards us on the front line with like 2 motorcycles with 2 guys each. And so the one pulled up really close, like 100 meters away on the road in the clearing. And the one guy gets off, the passenger gets off, and he gets down on the road. But I couldn't see a weapon, and it looked like he was praying or digging.
Before that, remember though, I had said, and I admit it was me saying hold back, because that had really got into my head about they potentially were civilians. But I said, fire a warning shot and see what they do.
Yeah.
And you fired the warning shot and it hit the wall next to them, and they did not behave like civilians.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, it all happened in
He
a few
did run
seconds.
away. He ran back to
The
the
guy on
thing.
the motorcycle backed up behind the building, but then that other guy was, to me, it looked like he was digging or he was taking up a firing position. I couldn't figure it out.
I think he was digging to set up a mine, and they didn't realize that we had pushed so far forward that night and that this was the new front. I think they thought we were still a few hundred meters back and they had the cover of the buildings.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I put the round into the wall right next to his head, and he ran away. And then everybody started shooting, I think.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
So I started shooting, but it was hard to hit them on the motorcycle. And then they moved back and ran away. And then shortly after that, you wanna describe like when they shot at you?
Well, I remember you and me were sitting on that front wall, and I had my GPS out in the rangefinder, and I was marking possible targets for airstrikes, and just logging them into the GPS.
I wasn't shooting yet at that point.
You were not? Oh, okay.
Was I shooting? I don't think I was
you
shooting.
weren't shooting. You were definitely not shooting, but I know there was. And then I kept doing that, and then I remember being on the wall, that section of wall by myself.
And I was complaining about, like I could have killed those 2 guys.
I remember that, and I was
Like-
feeling guilty, and I was, oh, geez, why did I do that? It should have been obvious to me that they were cheddar, and, I mean, that's the sort of feeling you get there.
Yeah. And that's the game. They're trying to put that doubt in you on purpose, playing the human shield game, and that's why they do that. It's just to get that effect.
But that did get to me, actually. It was sort of like, oh, we really missed our chance. We could have got at least one of them. If enough of us had opened fire, we could have got at least one of them.
I was thinking I should have shot the motorcycle driver and trapped the other guy there, and then we could have like pinned him down and killed him. But that's like retrospect 50, like hindsight's 2020.
And it is one of these things, you look back on it, I should have done this, I should have done that. But, we didn't, but thankfully we didn't actually pay the consequences. But the consequences were almost bad. I mean, I was logging the GPS positions, and then something went wrong with the GPS. Maybe the batteries were going flat or something. So I stepped away from my position and crouched down a little bit away from where I was sitting, and then the rocket from the recoilless launcher hit the exact spot where I was sitting, and it's not like a RPG rocket. It was much more powerful, and I didn't realize what it was. I just thought, oh, holy shit, we've been hit with an airstrike by mistake, or they've hit an airstrike's sort of been misguided or something. And I was really dazed by it. And then
I had just gone inside when that happened, and I was on like the window. Like I'd gone inside and went to the front of the building, to the window, and was looking out there with the scope.
also some of it would have got you. Well,
If I had been out there with you,
Yeah.
probably, because we were right next to each other, and I had just gone up and gone inside and was looking out the window, and then you had bent over when it hit,
Yeah.
and it took a huge chunk out of the wall,
Yeah.
made smoke everywhere, and it went through the second wall and up into the wall or the ceiling inside the room that I was in, and it hit inside there like shrapnel or a last bit of metal or whatever.
Right. That explains something, because when the explosion had hit and I was dazed, I was kneeling down, I had nothing but a tiny cut on my nose. Sorrow was yelling out, get back around here, get back around here. He called out to me. I think they thought I'd been hit. And then I ran round and I said, what was that, an airstrike or something? He says, no. He said, that's a rocket.
I was laughing when you said that because I was like, A, it was really, really loud. But B, if it was an airstrike, we wouldn't have been talking about it because we'd have all been disintegrated.
I fully get that, but because it was so close
in the moment,
to me,
yeah, when you're like,
it was the closeness of the rocket to me just felt like something massive had hit, and I was just engulfed in the smoke of it, and my brain was shaking.
yeah. And then,
so I didn't realize it was a rocket, that it was very, very close, rather than an airstrike. That was my feeling. It was what I thought it was an airstrike sort of 20 meters away from the building or something.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was an airstrike that had hit us.
Yeah.
But
And we started watching in that direction after that. Like, okay, from the angle of where this came through the wall and hit the other wall, like, where are they at? They're probably over here. So we started watching, and then we started to spot behind the big dump truck, trucks and motorcycles and foot
That
traffic.
wasn't where the rocket had come from.
No, but because we were
The
looking in
rocket
that
came
direction.
from the guys that we were shooting
Yeah,
at.
yeah, but they had run away after that.
Yeah.
So we were watching, like, where did they go? And we saw, because we were looking in that direction, where they had initially come from was by that dump truck.
Ah, right, yeah.
And so we were looking over there, and then I started to take shots because I realized that's like 600 meters. I can hit them there. So I started to shoot there.
Yeah.
And they would like go, first they were walking in front of the dump truck, and I started shooting, and then they stopped going in front of the dump truck, and they started going behind it. So they would go behind it, and then I would wait, and I would measure the timing, and I would shoot the other side before they would come out. And one guy double backed and like went back behind it, and then they'd start going behind the dump truck, and they'd stop, and then they'd go past it again at a run, so that I couldn't shoot them.
Now I remember all this, but what I also remember was that we were still getting, what would you call it?
We got pinned down by a sniper after that.
Oh, I remember that, but I mean, there was still that civilian consideration.
Yeah.
Some of the Casa Day guys were still saying, you got to be careful, there's civilians up there. You can't really, unless you can identify them doing something that looks military, that looks like it's a threat, you can't really shoot. And that created, for me, quite a bit of confusion. Not confusion, but it's sort of...
It's like stress.
That uncertainty, it's sort of, it puts you on edge. Because, on the one hand, you definitely don't want to shoot a civilian, but the other hand, you don't want to risk another incident like getting hit by the rocket because you were overly cautious, and that happened,
Well, my deal was like, if they're moving towards us, like, fuck them, like,
well, they
if
did
they're...
say that. The guy said if they're moving towards us, then they have to be cheddar.
Yeah.
And
I would ask Enrique, because he was the most experienced local there, the guy with the machine gun, and I would be like, so, right there, and he's like, yeah, that's the enemy. If they're moving right there, shoot them. And I was like, okay.
Get that. Let me just stop it and do a